To China next, where the country's ruling elite is meeting in the capital, Beijing, for a long-delayed policy gathering called the Third Plenum. No big announcements are expected to reform the world's second-largest economy. Xi Jinping is likely to focus on stability in the face of a real estate crisis, high youth unemployment, and surging government debt. Add trade and geopolitical tensions to the mix, and the challenges are even more difficult.
China's most important meeting is underway in Beijing. The plenum, held every 5 years to map out the direction of the country's long-term social and economic policies. The meeting isn't open to the public, but there's one topic that's undoubtedly on the table for discussion. That's China's sharp slowdown in economic growth, the slowest rate since the first quarter of 2023. Fed by weak consumer demand, a property sector meltdown, and debt accumulated by local governments.
China needs to change its development model, right? So the consumer sector is repressed. The income generation in China, which basically would fuel higher consumer spending over time, needs to be strengthened. There probably has to be some shift in ownership of assets from the public sector to stronger hands in the private sector.
Xi is focused on another strategy, one that harnesses what he calls new quality productive forces. Essentially, a plan to build more high-tech factories with robots and automated machines that can fill the labor shortage gap. But many of the measures Xi promised at the plenum in 2013 are still incomplete, tempering expectations this time around.
Let's get more from DW's China analyst Clifford Coonan, who joins me now in the studio. Clifford, good morning. So, President Xi Jinping has apparently been a big proponent for more of a role for the private sector. But will that happen?
Well, I think that's been the messaging that we've been seeing coming from this plenum, but it doesn't match the reality in many ways. All we've seen in recent years has actually been more focus on the state sector and a clampdown on the private sector. We've seen tycoons like Jack Ma from Alibaba disappearing for years because of being off message, things like this. So we're not seeing that much evidence to show that he is focused on the private sector. The state news agency Xinhua said that he was dealing with a lot of structural issues, and they said that he had a lot of tough bones that are hard to chew. And this is basically where he stands at the moment. He's trying to encourage the economy to grow more, but at the same time, he has these structural issues in that it's still very much, the Communist Party is still very much focused on the state sector.
I want to talk about these structural issues. To me, it sounds like there is a fundamental problem with the Chinese economy. Is that a correct assessment? And if so, is this plenum going to be the one that will take big, bold decisions on it?
I think it is. I mean, I think that is the problem. And I don't think the plenum is where we're going to get any big solutions to these problems. A major problem that China faces is debt, particularly government debt. A lot of local governments have been racking up these off-the-books debts, and some economists reckon it could be up to $11 trillion, which is about twice the size of the central government debt. These are enormous amounts of money, and $800 billion of that could be about to be in default. So there's a lot of these debt issues, and that means that it's very difficult to encourage growth when you're faced with these enormous debts. And so these are the structural issues. Also, the messaging, while trying to encourage foreign investment, at the same time, the conditions aren't ideal. Foreign investment is down by about a third in the first 5 months of the year. So there's a lot of these structural issues that are there, and the plenum isn't really a forum for dealing with this. I think any decisions for major revamp of the economy will have to be made by Xi Jinping, and there's no real indication that he's prepared to do that.
But it sounds counterintuitive when the economy is not performing well and you have these fundamental problems that are not new. People have been talking about them for decades. There have been warnings about that. Yet no decision has been taken to try and improve this. Can you explain that?
Well, for many years, I think there's been a lot of different things working at once in China, in favor of the Chinese economy. You've got a massive population. You've had a lot of foreign intervention in the form of investment, and there's been a lot of goodwill towards China. increasingly, that's sort of changing now. The economy is maturing. You're not going to see the double-digit growth rates that you had in the 2000s, even up to the 2000s. Instead, you're seeing a more mature economy, but it's also an aging economy. There's a big problem with demographics. The fact that China may be, they always say that the thing is you get rich before you get old, but China may be getting old before it gets rich. So it's dealing with these massive structural issues. So I think in some ways the prospects for the Chinese economy without these major structural reforms are looking fairly bleak.
Any big meeting in China always has political significance as well. Can you talk a bit about that in relation to the Third Plenum?
Well, a lot of it is theatre, and as we've seen in the pictures, the Great Hall of the People with the Red Star and the delegates and all of that sort of pomp and is very much part of the political message in China. Increasingly, the question is going to be whether he can keep that, whether the Communist Party can maintain control while the economy is slowing down, because as long as the economy was expanding quickly, it was very easy for the Communist Party to stay in control. Right. Now Xi Jinping has to insist on stability, and it's going to be a balancing act going forward.
We'll leave it there for the moment. DW's China analyst Clifford Coonan, always a pleasure chatting with you.